Fox News Alert with some very pointed new questions now coming from some powerful members of the Senate Intel Committee, upset with how the hunt for Osama bin Laden is depicted in the new Hollywood movie Zero Dark 30. These senators want to know whether the CIA misled the filmmakers, as this movie suggests that torture may have led to some information that resulted in bin Laden being found and killed. A letter to the acting CIA director reads, quote, "In regards to the bin Laden operation, what information was acquired from CIA detainees subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques? When was this information provided, prior to, during, or after the detainee was subjected to the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques? And if it was after, how long after? Please note whether such information was information previously known to the CIA." Hegseth is CEO of Concerned Veterans for America. So what happened was the acting director of the CIA, Mike Morrell, was speaking to his troops. And he said, he was talking about this movie, and he said, the film was wrong to depict harsh techniques as key to finding bin Laden, but he said to them, those interrogations, the harsh interrogations, did produce some useful intelligence, which about set Dianne Feinstein and John McCain's hair on fire, as they couldn't believe he said that, and wrote this letter to him immediately saying, what do you base that on? Where are you getting your assertion that any enhanced interrogation techniques at all led to any useful intelligence in tracking down bin Laden? Why that reaction? What's going on here?
Well, they had that reaction because they were a part of an investigation of the CIA's interrogation and detention techniques for a long time to try to determine the effectiveness, the efficacy of enhanced interrogation techniques. I think, looking at all sides, that the acting director of the CIA's comments in that email to the CIA are probably as close to accurate as you're going to find. I think it's clear in cobbling together all the pieces that it wasn't the enhanced interrogations that led to giving up the name of the courier that led to the capture of bin Laden. However, either the threat of enhanced interrogations or some other details that came out of enhanced interrogations were part of cobbling together the mosaic with other intelligence work that led to the capture of bin Laden. So it may not be direct A to B, like I've said before. It may be that A led to B and then B led to C. And because of that, you can say, well, it wasn't directly the interrogations, it was the follow-on. There's a lot of gray area in there. But I think the acting director's most recent comments are probably the most accurate we've seen.
Is important to the senators who wrote this letter, Feinstein and McCain and others, because they are against enhanced interrogation techniques. And we're not just talking about waterboarding. There are other techniques that were used, sleepless nights and things like that. And they don't want the record reflecting that any of those controversial techniques were useful. And I don't know whether they were or they weren't. There seems to be a dispute about whether they were or they weren't. But they don't even want this Morrell on the record to his own employees as saying they were useful in tracking down bin Laden.
I don't know. I don't know that they can control that. The problem is, who's going to ultimately write this record? A Hollywood movie that a lot of people are going to go see in a week. And at the front end of that Hollywood movie,
which is not a documentary.
Which is not a documentary. It says based on first-hand accounts of events that occurred. Now, listen, you can give as much access as you want to a filmmaker, to inside information. Doesn't mean they're going to take it. When I was in Iraq, we had an embedded reporter from the Wall Street Journal. We gave him full access for a week, but ultimately when he wrote that story, he was writing his own story. Same thing with this Hollywood filmmaker. For them to expect it will be accurately portrayed, I think is asking too much. They're trying to sell a movie with spectacular images. They're going to do that. That's going to be the record written, unfortunately, but I understand why they want to be very clear about what worked and what did not work.
Now, Jose Rodriguez Jr., who published a book not long ago and promoted it in several places, and he ran the enhanced interrogation program for the CIA for years, during the relevant years. And he came out with an opinion piece in the Washington Post about this whole kerfuffle and says, number one, enhanced interrogation techniques did lead to information that helped in finding bin Laden. He said it did, period. He said the guy who gave him information that started the revelation of who the courier was, who would ultimately lead them to bin Laden, he said the guy who gave that information wasn't waterboarded, but he was subjected to some enhanced interrogation, and that was critical. That's just a fact, according to him. He also says he's seen Zero Dark 30. He wants people to keep in mind that he believes that the way they did enhanced interrogations in that movie is completely overblown and bears almost no resemblance to how it was actually done by professional CIA officers. But he says the Senate committee wants to punish the CIA for telling the truth, and that's what this is about.
I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. The Senate wants to expunge the record, if at all possible, and sort of lay down a marker that enhanced interrogations don't work, didn't lead to the capture of bin Laden, they need to go away. The fact of the matter is, what he wrote and what friends of mine who are in the CIA and have done these types of things have done, enhanced interrogation techniques are effective. Whether or not they're the right thing to do and when you use them are important questions, and that's another debate. But the experience has shown that they work. Whether or not they led to the name of bin Laden or whether or not they led to details that led to the name of bin Laden are sort of academic distinctions that are being drawn very effectively by these senators to say it didn't work because he didn't technically give up the name. Well, if you give up other information that leads to other information, that's how good intelligence work is done. So I think we need to be willing to understand that there are things that enhanced interrogation provided that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten, and then we can move to the next conversation of how we draw the lines of what's allowed and what is not allowed.
He says in his piece that after obtaining this essential lead on the Courier from this enhanced interrogation, years of meticulous intelligence work followed. It wasn't all about that one time. He does say, and take it, our viewers can decide for themselves whether they believe this or not, but he says when you watch this film, which he doesn't really have a problem with, but he wants you to know that it really overblows what the CIA agents did. He said, number one, a single open-fingered slap across the face by a CIA officer to a detainee would have required written authorization from Washington. He said no one was hung from ceilings, contrary to the movie. He says the filmmakers stole the dog collar scenes from the abuses at Abu Ghraib in Iraq. Never done like that at CIA black sites where they did these enhanced interrogation. And they said three of the worst terrorists on the planet were subject to waterboarding. But it wasn't in any way the way it's portrayed in the movie. And it was no worse than the kind that's done on tens of thousands of U.S. military personnel in their training when they're subjected to this. In any event, it's an interesting op-ed, so you can read it yourselves. Pete, thanks so much for being here.